Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts.
So thanks, Miles, for joining us. This is an incredible operation, really, led by the NCA, the National Crime Agency in the UK. It's all quite a bit James Bondy even, but in the middle of it all, of course, our own Kinahan Cartel get a name check. Is this a long-term operation? How long have the NCA been looking into this, do you know?
Yeah, it is a long-term operation in the sense of, I think for a couple of years, at least, they've been looking at this stuff and have been picking off money couriers in the UK. So, they said as part of the operation, they seized £20 million worth of currency and crypto. And a lot of those seizures were basically from these arrests. So some of them have already gone to trial and people have been convicted. So it's something that they've been working on at the lower levels for a couple of years.
So we see, of course, it's basically two companies, and what they're doing is they're collecting cash off drug dealers or other criminals, and they're laundering it. Can you sort of describe how that process works? How does that drug money eventually become clean and end up in the hands of criminals?
Yeah, so in the most sort of general sense, as you say, there are people who are being dispatched. So the lowest level of the network, in terms of the network, you have various tiers. So say you have sort of controllers, the top people of the organization, and then lower down you have these couriers. The couriers, for example, let's say there's a drug trafficker in Liverpool, and they've built up a big pile of cash from selling cocaine, for example. They want to launder that money. This is a service that sort of through that network, they will get in contact with someone who will come and pick up their cash and then charge them a fee to launder it somewhere. The ways in which they're laundering it varies from sort of, in some cases, they were moving money through companies. So the NCA mentioned a construction company where several £1 million was moved through. Or in other instances, it's through sort of trade-based money laundering. But the one, the sort of main element of this was that this money, this cash, would eventually be converted into cryptocurrency. So specifically, a cryptocurrency called Tether, which is a so-called stable coin, which is a term which means the crypto is pegged to the US dollar. So it means that the value of that currency, the digital token, doesn't move. So Bitcoin, the price is moving around all the time. If you're a money launderer, that's not good for you because, you could pick up that million quid in cash from a drug trafficker somewhere in the UK, and then you get halfway down the motorway and the price has fallen by 30%. If you're trying to sort of move it into crypto. So you want something stable. So in this network, once you've sort of picked up the cash, you have on the other side of the trade, you have this, you mentioned two companies, one of these companies, which is called Smart, is run by a Russian woman, relatively young, 38 years old, out of a sort of fancy office in Moscow. And that company was dealing a lot with the other side of this trade. So, on the one hand, you have your drug traffickers in Europe, and on the other side, in Russia, you have these sort of cyber criminals, these so-called ransomware gangs who are extorting people, hacking into databases around the world and basically ransoming that data for a payment, and that payment comes in crypto. So you have these people in Russia who have this massive amount of crypto, and you have these gangsters in Europe who have a massive amount of cash. And so this network is sort of facilitating those two sides to sort of do a mutually beneficial trade through that network where, cash can be exchanged for crypto and crypto can be exchanged for cash.
And of course, then it's certainly the NCA suggested that crypto could then be exchanged for cocaine directly in South America, which is another kind of amazing development that, cryptocurrencies surely are ideal for money launderers and drug dealers because they're just not centralized.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting in terms of the amount of indictments that you see in both the US and in Europe, which involve specifically this cryptocurrency called Tether. You've got this amazing array of sort of international gangsters and villains using this stuff. You have everyone from North Korean hackers, Russian spies in the case of this NCA case recently, European drug traffickers, you have fentanyl traffickers, you have, Iranian smugglers, people moving around Venezuelan oil, sort of really every sort of type of malign activity you can imagine in these cases. Something keeps popping up, which is Tether, with this this extreme traded cryptocurrency in the world. And because it's pegged to the US dollar, it really makes these transactions work. But, they will always say, the company itself, the company behind Tether always says, we collaborate with law enforcement agencies, and we actually helping tackle crime because you can track these transactions on the blockchain. And that's why these investigations like the NCA one are able to happen. But it is a very interesting phenomenon in terms of, you've seen, as you said, like Mexican cartels, Colombian cartels, people moving towards this frictionless means of moving money across borders.
Yeah, because it never has to go into a bank account at any point. So the ability to trace it is surely a lot less. I mean, where do we know exactly where the Kinahan Cartel fit into all of this? They're obviously have been named by the NCA, but they seem to be suggesting at least that the Irish cartel is one of the main players in using this service.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, I guess we can define what we don't know. So at least we don't know exactly what time period this took place in. We probably ballpark have to think it happened between about 2021 and sometime in the last year or so, based on the sort of operation. That's not definitive though. And so then it sort of really is, the question would be, did it happen before they were sanctioned or after they were sanctioned? And also, was this a sort of business operational transaction, or was it to move personal money around? And if it was after they were sanctioned, was it to evade those sanctions and get around those sanctions? And, I don't know the answer to those questions. We have minimal information exactly about what they were doing. But as you say, they were sort of named quite prominently by the NCA as one of the sort of VIP clients of this network alongside the others.
Yeah, I mean, we did hear at the time that the sanctions occurred shortly after that. They were really attempting to convert all their money into cryptocurrency. Now, obviously, that wasn't proven or anything like that, but that was certainly the word on the street. The James Bond aspect of it, as I alluded to at the start, comes with this other aspect of all of this, where the NCA are clearly stating that there's some sort of Russian state involvement in this as well, and that some of the profits were used, at least in part, to fund even the Russian TV station that was based in the UK for so long.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating element of it. And it sort of really shows this, what I think is this sort of growing trend of sort of sanctioned governments interacting with criminal networks. And, especially after the sort of invasion of Ukraine, you had a massive amount of sanctions against Russia, and you also had a huge amount of diplomatic expulsions. So, basically Russian intelligence officers being expelled from Western capitals. And so sort of the way in which Russia would be operating in the West has had to change. And when what you saw previously, for example, with Iran, which has been under a massive amount of sanctions until Ukraine was the most sanctioned country in the world, you've seen many, many instances of Iranian intelligence services interacting with criminals, almost as like cutouts, so in the case of targeted assassinations or money laundering. And so I think this is sort of in an interesting sort of trend where you're probably more likely to see this activity grow over time because of what has happened in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and obviously the Russian government have been accused of running propaganda outfits really across the West, and these have to be paid for. And obviously the sanctions mean that the movement of money from Russian banks outside of their own country is limited. And at least it seems to be the suggestion that they instead relied on this money to carry out those operations.
Yes, I mean, yeah, well, the NCA was very explicit in saying that this money was used for what they called "quote unquote" Russian espionage operations, and as you mentioned, to fund Russia Today, which is under Western sanctions, and so. It's just it's so interesting how quickly these networks adapt, and how when sanctions come into play, that people very quickly find a new way of moving their money around.
And also, it seems Dubai, like a lot of things we end up talking about, Dubai always ends up popping up and playing a central role. And it seems, again, it did in this case. The movement of money seems to have gone into Dubai, which is a murky world of finance, to say the least.
Yes, as you say, it sort of always seems to pop up. It's a sort of really fascinating, has such a fascinating role in sort of modern illicit financial flows and criminality, where it always seems to be there. And in this case, it very much was an important part of the network. So TGR, which is one of the other firms, which was part of this network, this sort of along with Smart, TGR had offices in London, and it also had offices in Dubai. So the owners of TGI, we don't know actually where they are. So we know that the owner of Smart, the U.S. Treasury said, because they released these simultaneous sanctions at the same time as the NCA announcement, the Russian woman who was at the head of Smart, she's actually under arrest. She's in France, detained, which is not something we knew until this week. But the TGR guys, we don't know where they are. So it's quite possible that they're in Dubai too, considering their business footprint there. But it's a very interesting, very, very interesting nexus.
Yeah, it is, of course. And like while there might be sanctions between the US and Europe and Russia, I presume that Dubai and Russia, those sanctions don't exist, and the movement of money across those banks continues to this day.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, geopolitically and economically, Dubai is in this interesting situation where it sort of has to sort of straddle two worlds, because very much like a large amount of Russian money has moved into Dubai since the Ukraine war, and a lot of sanctioned oligarchs feel they are free to go to Dubai and spend money in Dubai, but at the same time, obviously, the authorities there have to sort of tread this difficult line without this becoming too much the dislike of the US government and its allies. And so you have seen some efforts to enforce sanctions in Dubai, but a lot of other things are happening there. A lot of sort of so-called dual use technology, basically things that Russia needs to basically foreign made components and parts and other sort of technology which it needs to sort of build weaponry, such as like cruise missiles and semiconductors for cruise missiles. Those things are under Western sanctions, often made by Western companies pretty much entirely, but they a lot of the trade in those is also going through the UAE. So it's sort of it's a sort of fascinating place, if we could say that, for the sort of the sort of geopolitics and the sort of financial flows sort of interact with each other.
Yeah, well, all the money seems to go in one direction, all right. It all seems to end up there. I mean, what do we know about the progress of the investigation? Obviously, there were a large number of arrests. Have people been charged in the UK this week, or have they haven't come before the courts? I mean, obviously, there was another interesting mention of a guy we had written about who has been prosecuted and jailed in Dublin after a handover of cash. But is there further progress in the UK at this point?
I think there have been quite a large number of arrests. So I think the NCA said over the entire course of the investigation, I think it said over 80 people had been arrested. A lot of those have been charged, and quite a lot of them have been sentenced. But in terms of the really top level people in the network, we don't know where some of them are. We know where, the Russian woman who was running Smart, we know she's in detention in France, but the other people, we don't know where they are. So in that regard, sort of the top management of this network are still at liberty.
And of course, our own Kinahan's still at liberty, still in Dubai. No developments yet, despite a huge effort by the Irish state. Do you think the involvement of the American government in this, which certainly remained involved in this NCA investigation, surely that puts them under more pressure again, the Kinahans, who seem to definitely have caught the attention of the American government because of their links to Russia and maybe Iran and other countries like that?
Yeah, I'd say that in general, these sorts of international collaborations on these sorts of investigations is bad news for any group, especially like the Kinahans, which is sanctioned, high profile, because it just makes that sort of integration between and information sharing between different countries and different law enforcement agencies a bit closer and every time. And I think that is really the worst news for you. If you are a sort of sanctioned crime group, you want fragmented, sort of investigations into you between countries that aren't collaborating. So that's clearly not good news for them. Also, being in the headlines linked to hostile state behavior like espionage operations, from countries which are sort of adversaries of the United States is obviously not good news either. That said, we'll have to see what how things play out. I mean, obviously we will see. It remains to be seen how the incoming U.S. president, obviously Donald Trump, how that's going to shift. Sort of what the Department of Justice prioritizes, what the U.S. Treasury prioritizes, and who's going to head up key agencies. So, for example, the Drug Enforcement Administration. We don't know yet who's going to be in charge of that. So that will probably have a bit of an impact on whether, for example, the US starts to focus on more domestic issues. There's obviously a huge opioids crisis in the United States and a lot of political attention on that. And that does cause some critics to say, guys, why are you focusing on, for example, an Irish drugs cartel out of Dubai when we have a massive opioid problem on the streets of the United States? And that could be what the way it goes. It could also go a different way. So it really remains to be seen. But I do think that the politics will play a role in how much of a priority going after international, non-American targets is.
Well, exactly. Predicting Donald Trump's actions are never going to be easy, and they may well change from day to day if past experience is anything to say. Well, no doubt, Miles, we'll be coming back to this because it is an incredible operation, and once again, we're getting name checked right at the top of the criminal investigations across the world. So, thanks very much.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.